So, oh, look, now it's recording. So all my words now are lost to time.
Wow.
Hey, so does someone want to jump in, and that way I don't feel like the teacher like calling on people in class? And then I'll just sort of look and like make sure we're not missing people.
I'll jump in since I also did War of the Worlds after a fashion. When I first heard of the anthology, it was a little bit along in the process already, and so I was sent the list of things that people had already called a dibs on, and some of the ones, a couple of my favorite novels are Dracula and Frankenstein, and there were already multiple stories related to both of those. And so I just started looking at the list to see what wasn't on the list yet. And Ben wasn't on the list yet, so there was no H.G. Wells when I saw the list. And so I went to do my double check to make sure what Wells was in the public domain, and I saw that The Invisible Man and The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds confirmed that all three of them were in the public domain. And so my pitch was, I'm going to do some H.G. Wells, maybe two of these, maybe all three. I wasn't quite sure when I first put it in. And but I very quickly came up with an idea of how to meld The Invisible Man and The Time Machine together, because both of those main characters are scientists and researchers, and it was very easy to imagine that the Invisible Man character was one of the friends that the time traveler invites over to his house for his little salons that he does. And then I just decided to throw in some timey-wimey time travel stuff to get the War of the Worlds in there as well.
Jeremy.
And I just had a lot of fun researching it, finding the ways to kind of put together a timeline. I wanted to treat all three of the novels as the canon that existed in the same world, and so I wanted to do the minimum amount of retconning necessary to dovetail them together, while still allowing the reader to imagine that all of the events of all three novels still took place the way they do, but that my story would just kind of fit in there. And so that was a fun challenge. One of the great things, one of the great moments of research for me was when I was considering the idea of having a cameo in the story from the narrator of War of the Worlds, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it. And I own all the books in print, but I download them all in ebook form so that I could do keyword searches while I was looking up details. And then I discovered that there was a scene in War of the Worlds while the narrator is traipsing across London trying to get to his wife. He essentially walks through the neighborhood where the time traveler lives. And so then I found the opening to get a little appearance of that character in there as well.
There's a cameo at the end of your story. Well, not just at the end, but you have a cameo in there that's really lovely. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Some of the people on here probably know Dave Gallanter, who's a Star Trek writer for many, many years. I've known him for many, many years. And we lost him to cancer last December. And so as I was working on various projects at the time, including this one, a lot of people I know who are Star Trek writers, we were discussing various ways that we were going to remember Dave by, dedications, characters, that sort of thing. And when the idea first came up, I was working on my story for Turning the Tide, but the nature of my story was such that it just really had two characters who are already existing characters. And I'd already given a name to the time traveler character just to make it a little bit easier on myself. And so I didn't really think that there was going to be a place to give a little shout out to Dave. But then as the story developed, and I was getting to the end of the story, I suddenly realized that it would make sense to have a neighbor of the time traveler interact with him. And so I named the character after Dave, and it became very emotional for me to write it because the nature of this, the time traveler is, going back through time. And so he says farewell to his neighbor, and writing that after losing Dave was very emotional, but I just loved being able to incorporate him into the story.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was a surprise when I read it.
It was as much of a surprise to me because it really just happened as I was writing the scene, and I was like, oh, I need a neighbor. And it just, it all just happened very spontaneously for me.
Cool.
Robert, do you want to go ahead about yours? How'd you pick it?
Yeah, I think mine may be unique in the entire anthology. Everyone else has written words that they can depend on. Space Patrol, for whatever reason, never had any written fiction. And as a result, what I wanted to do was to create a short story that could have been made into one of the half-hour episodes, and yet remain true to the characters, but with a more updated, current feel to it. And I think I pretty well succeeded. But at its heart, Space Patrol was nothing but space opera. It was high adventure in the wild, vast reaches of outer space. If you've ever seen one of the shows, that's the opening of it. And I really, as a kid, loved the idea that I could get all of the products just by eating rice checks or whatever, sending in the box tops and 25 cents and get the really cool stuff they had on the show. I mean, this was one of those things where send it off to St. Louis, wait 6 weeks, and, every day go out to the mailbox to see if it had come. Here's one of the things that they plugged like crazy. It's, I don't know if you can see it very well. It's the Cosmic Smoke Gun. It's a little itty bitty thing, and it shot flour. You just put it in there and you squeeze it, and there's a little puff of flour that would come out. I forget what it did in the actual show. I think it paralyzed them or knocked them out or something. Great fun when you're 8 years old. I mean, super times. But all of the characters I loved the most in the show, I put into the story. They had one of the best bad guys ever in Prince Baccarati. This guy is over the top, he's crazy, and he has a castle on Planet X. And no matter what you wanted on Planet X, it's there. There are dinosaurs, and there's swamps, and there's this medieval castle, so help me, and anything you wanted. And my story is the comet cannon of Planet X. And Baccarati is causing little burbles of magma to come out of one of these volcanoes, and is shooting them at the planets. Of course, Commander Corey has to stop this, and therein lies the story. If the folks out there, however many we've got in the audience, want to know how he does it, Carol Carlisle is responsible for being able to stop it. So by golly, grab the anthology, give it a read. But this was really my launching point for the science fiction career. I didn't know it at the time. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a scientist. I was for a while, and somehow I sort of meandered over into writing, and I have stayed there for an awful long time. Love every day of it. Let me pass the baton to whomever.
I can go next. So I grew up like many folks who like science fiction, reading Jules Verne and the amazing wondrous stories from him. And I actually have 2 of the actual copies that I used to read when I was a kid, and you might remember these, like the
Wow.
great illustrated classics. And I don't know if anybody else watched Wishbone, but I am of that generation.
Wow.
So I have the
Wow.
Wishbone version of the book.
Wow.
But you know, I really, really love the ocean. And I'm just inspired by, you know, sort of oceanic settings. And so when it was time to choose a story, I went with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I sort of went at it from the perspective of what would happen if you took that sort of setting with the Nautilus and this idea of a cloistered society that has sort of rejected mainstream society and its ideologies and pulled it down into, you know what, we're gonna make our own little utopia around different ideals and live a different way. And so, like Ben, I think it was Ben who said this, I reread 20,000 Leagues, and then I also went and read The Mysterious Island, which is kind of like a sequel. And I hadn't read that one before because I needed to know what was the canonical sort of life history of Captain Nemo, because I then took that and pulled it forward and posed the question of what if Captain Nemo had designated a successor, and what would that look like if Captain Nemo wasn't just a name or a person, but what if it became a title and a role within like leadership within a society. And as much as I love Verne's writing, women are conspicuously absent from his stories in any meaningful way. And gender representation in fiction, and particularly in science fiction, is something I care very much about. And so I have a female protagonist, a female Captain Nemo in my story, and that sort of is one of the themes going on. But mostly there's just a lot of women doing really awesome stuff in the story, which was really fun to write. So I also enjoy writing like climate fiction. So there's I'm going to say consequences of climate change that show up in my story that the characters have to deal with. And I also enjoy solar punk, which is kind of it's an emerging genre that looks at a more optimistic outlook. So a lot of science fiction is dystopian, and it shows us like if we kind of continue in humanity's really horrible habits, here's where society will likely end up. And that is like awesome in its own right. I'm a huge Blade Runner fan, okay? But solar punk goes the other direction and says, what if we find a way to do a 180, or at least pull ourselves away from that path and find a way to exist harmoniously with the environment, with each other, not necessarily in a utopia, but what if we could use some of these technologies and these advancements to find more of an equilibrium that's a little more positive. And so I attempted at least to create a society that I think checks some of those boxes in my short story, which is called What Men Ruin, We Shall Raise. And it was a pleasure to write. I was geeky about it with Derek the whole time. We were talking about writing this, and I was like, Derek, I can't believe I get to write Captain Nemo. So yeah, it's a really it was an honor, and I really like how it turned out. And it's really cool to, I mean, all of us are tie-in writers here, but there's something special about being able to step into the mindset and the character of, you know, someone that you grew up reading and being very inspired by. So it was a privilege.
I guess I'll go next. So I have a Sherlock Holmes story in this anthology. And I think when I was about probably 10 years old, 9 or 10, I purchased my first book on my own without my mom or anyone. And it was a anthology of Sherlock Holmes short stories. And I read it like, I just reread it and read it the whole summer. And it was one of my favorites. Holmes has always been one of my favorite characters. And something I've always wanted to do is, if I ever had the opportunity, I told myself I would write a Sherlock Holmes story. And about maybe 15 now, 20 years ago, I used to live in the Bronx, and there is a Baker Avenue in the Bronx. And I happened upon this area one day, and I was like, oh wow, wouldn't that be cool if Sherlock Holmes came from the Bronx? And then, just that one idea spins the character and puts him in a whole dynamic, because then, you can make this character anyone or any gender, anything you want to be. I chose to make Sherlock Holmes a person of color, and also Watson. And what would it be like for them living in New York City, living in the Bronx, a contemporary character, not a character, that we are all familiar with in the past, but a contemporary Sherlock Holmes. And what would he have to deal with being that individual of color, dealing with contemporary issues at the same time, solving crimes and solving mysteries? And what would that be like? And then I had to figure out, well, okay, I'm going to do that. So I need to think about the relationship, of course, between Holmes and Watson, which is a classic relationship, and what those characters will be like in their first time meeting. And the first time they actually met in literature, in Conan Doyle's short story, it was a study in Scarlet. And so I was like, well, I'm going to have to lean on that a little bit and take that name. And I created the name of my story is A Study in Crimson. And it's the first time these two characters meet. But I had an idea for Sherlock Holmes that I've not seen in 137 years of this character. I've never seen the idea that I had for the character. And I'd never seen it in film, novelization, or television. And I said, okay, so I'm going to do this. And I've had this idea for a long time, about almost 15, 20 years. And I was like, all right, so I'm going to do this. And I did a lot of prep work, like everyone else. I did a lot of prep work, a lot of watching all the different iterations of Sherlock, and just stripping the character down to the core of the character, of someone that could be identified as Sherlock Holmes, regardless who it is. I think Sherlock is literally the greatest detective, and he's an archetype unto himself, right? So then taking that character, stripping down everything I liked about him, everything that we are familiar and know about him, and portraying that in a contemporary, actually young Black man, which is something that's never been done, because Sherlock, we've always seen him is of a certain age, 30-ish plus, maybe even 40-ish and older. And I wanted to just go the other direction with that. So I did that, and I wound up writing the story in one night. And it was a little hard to start, but once I started, it just flowed out of me. And the character spoke to me. All the characters in the story spoke to me. I would love to tell you what's happening in this story, because I think if you like or love Sherlock Holmes, I think this is a story you will enjoy. And any iteration of Sherlock that you like, I think you can look at the Sherlock I created and identify with something that I've written and given you. And I really want to tell you what's going on in this story, but you have to read it. You just have to read it, and you have to read it to the end. And I just am very thankful that I could actually check on my writer's wish list of being able to now say that I've written a Sherlock Holmes story, and it's even given me ideas for others. So I'm really proud that I've been a part of the anthology and be able to do that.
Very cool. Definitely very cool. Hey, I am going to pass this to Greg right now. Hi, Greg. If you want to do a super quick intro, like who you are, and talk a little bit about what story you picked and why you picked it.
Well, I gotta begin by apologizing abjectly that, in fact, after plugging this for weeks and talking about it and plan, I literally spaced. I'm going to actually, honestly, I was writing a big tense dialogue scene. All hell was breaking loose. People were shouting at each other, screaming at each other. Our heroes are in deep trouble. And I completely lost track of the time until I actually paused to check Facebook and saw the message from Kelly saying, "Hey, Greg," word, and hurried over here to join you. So yeah, my apologies. In fact, I was not home downstairs watching TV or eating pizza. I was literally having my characters tear each other's souls to pieces. And
you're writing. That's
do.
great. That's right. That's right.
But anyway, I will say, when I first was approached about this, my brain at first went blank because there were so many possibilities. With the entire history of public domain, it was like, one of the nice things about being a tie-in writer, it helps focus you. Oh, you are writing a Star Trek novel. You are writing a Buffy story. You are writing, here it was like, do I want to do a pirate story? Do I want to do Greek mythology? Do I want to do a historical story about Houdini or Rasputin or Lizzie Borden? What do I want to do? But perhaps inevitably, me being me, and anyone who knows me being me, I went back to Dracula. I read Dracula for the first time in 6th grade, devoured it, and I remember being disappointed when I hit the last page. Vampires are my thing. When in doubt, vampires. When in doubt, Dracula. I was in fact listening to the soundtrack to Scars of Dracula as I was writing. And in fact, the scene I was writing involved, shocker, a vampire. So that being said, as we zoom in on, of course, Dracula, public domain for a long, long time. And particularly, however, my story does not feature Dracula. It is a story about Mina Harker, formerly Mina Murray, who is, of course, the heroine of the book, and kind of wondering about what became of her afterwards and jumping ahead to look at her life. I was amused to see, because we were all working independently, when I finally sat down to read one of the other stories in the book. I think it's the one by Stephen Sullivan, who also did a sequel to Dracula, also kind of picks up 20 years later. And we both gave Mina a daughter named Lucy, which I guess it follows logically from her good friend. But so I was sort of amused. We both zoomed in on Dracula and I started wondering what happened to, son Quincy, and we both gave him a daughter named Lucy. So I'll say my story without giving too much away, possibly, and again, I noticed this rereading this, and this was at the back of my head, there's a certain homage to Peter Pan. In fact, there's not overtly, not directly, but the subtext is very much Dracula is to Windy as Dracula is to Mina as Peter Pan is to Windy.
Whoa.
Which is sort of the subtext or theme. And I'm not even sure if I did that on purpose, but I remember rereading the story and, oh, right, yeah, okay, that's what I'm doing here. So this is the future Mina Harker with perhaps a little bit of Peter Pan subtext wandering into the story, because again, I couldn't pin myself down. There were just too many possibilities. And once you start, the fun of public domain characters is once you start mixing, cross-pollinating, they get really, really fun, In fact, we've all been doing this. One of my first professional sales to Amazing Stories way back 40 years ago was a Peter Pan Tempest crossover where Prospero, Shakespeare's wizard, met Peter Pan. So I've been playing the, fanfic with public domain characters thing for as long as I can remember. Okay. And probably going back into, my non-professional days. So yeah, and like I said, sorry I missed hearing you guys talk about your stories. I can testify, I have read now the entire book cover to cover. And one of the great pleasures of this project was, again, knowing only kind of vaguely what everybody else was doing, sitting down. And I actually was reading one story a night for about a month, and that was a very enjoyable practice. So I recommend you all do it, everyone out there in the audience. Although you can read it all in one sitting if you want, or you can dollop it out one night, one story a night, as I did. Any questions from the audience? Okay, no. Oh,
So
I see.
there is
I'm looking at the comments. Thank you, William McDermott. Okay, so good idea there. I'm glad you enjoyed it, And thank you, Ed, for plugging my books here. So, and I'm sorry for missing my deadline. I'm a bad writer. I should have played.
Well, yeah, but as far as excuses go, you were writing, so.
Yeah, I
guess
would
we
feel
can
much
let
more
you
guilty
slide.
if I was out just downstairs, playing a video game, but I was actually writing. 96,000 words and counting.
Good, cool. I think I'm the only one who hasn't talked about their story yet. And I think in the book, which I have read the whole thing, off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of any other story that didn't have either a science fiction or a fantastical bent to it. I wrote about Mulan, and the reason Mulan's always appealed to me just because she's a character she was a problem solver. She saw what needed to be done. She didn't hesitate to do it. It didn't matter that she was flying in the face of tradition. But the other reason I picked Mulan, and this isn't a spoiler because it's clear from the opening sentence, this is an adventure of Mulan with her granddaughter. And the reason I did that is, after you're a legend, what do you do? Like, what happens with the rest of your life? So I wanted to show that she had one. She had a long, basically happy life. Because one thing that, Kelli mentioned dystopia, especially in science fiction, and there's some incredible dystopia out there. Can be really, really awesome, incredibly well done. I hate it. I don't do dystopia. So another reason I picked Mulan was to show that, after turning back the Huns that one time and saving the emperor, she didn't get killed the next day, because that kind of thing annoys me. So that was why I picked Mulan. I had a lot of fun writing it. I had to do some research writing it just because I wasn't familiar as I wanted to be with that time period. We have 2 additional questions in the Q&A session. One we've kind of touched on already, but if anyone wants to add, they can jump in. Because the first question is, what was your second choice for your story if you had one? And then another question, if you were casting your story as a movie, who would you cast?
Well,
I can
mine's
call on
easy.
people, you guys can jump in.
Because mine was easy, as I mentioned. I wrote my character with no gender or type of description at all, so it could be cast by anybody, to be honest. I really didn't have an image in my mind other than, like I said, I kind of channeled Wells and how he wrote War of the Worlds, because you just don't get a description of that, the professor or whatever. You really don't get a description of him at all. And that it's because the description is not germane to the story. There's no impact other than the fact that it could have been anyone. And I think I really like that idea. So if I really had to pick, if I had to do that, I would definitely support an Indigenous actor, because that's part of my heritage and that's part of my, I support Indigenous artists. So I would love to see somebody like that in that type of position, but that's a personal choice. But in my head, I don't have anybody specific in mind. So Wes Studi would be awesome, but I think he's a little too old for the character. But that's where I'm at.
I didn't think of anybody in mind when I was writing the story, but it occurs to me that the timing is right and enough time has passed since Bram Stoker's Dracula. You could probably cast Winona Ryder at this point as the old Mina Harker, and that would be, fun, Although I had to remind myself when writing the story, I'd forgotten that Mina is actually a blonde in the novel, even though the movies often portray her as brunette. I actually had to go back and double check that and check my friends on Facebook. Am I right that she's actually a blonde in the novel? But Winona Ryder would be fun. That'd be a fun in-joke, Easter egg.
If I had to cast it, my Sherlock story, I would definitely pick Idris Elba as Watson, not as Sherlock. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. As Watson, not as Sherlock. And for Sherlock, I would like it to be an unknown thespian actor, because there's a lot that has to happen, like emotionally with the character. So I would prefer it actually to be someone young and unknown. I think that would be really great. Somebody with range, because you need a lot of range for what I wrote. But yeah, that's all I got. I didn't have a second choice. I was desperate to get like Sherlock. So
yeah, when it comes to a second choice, it's amazing to me how many of the rest of you did the one that I would have gone, the War of the Worlds. I've got a War of the Worlds story I wanted to do. This would have been great, but everyone else had already taken it. That when I saw the Space Patrol, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. As far as casting Space Patrol, that's rough because we know what all of the characters look like. In most written fiction, you can imagine yourself in the role or someone else, and it's playing on your own imagination. With TV, you get what you get, or in movies, you get what you get. It's whoever's up there on the screen. So if I had the choice, I would have picked the original cast for mine. Unfortunately, I don't think any of the original cast are still alive, but you know, that's what happens when you're looking at something 70 years old.
Kelly, how about you? Second choice, and do you have any casting choices?
Second choice probably would have been Journey to the Center of the Earth or Frankenstein, which has been mentioned several times, and they already had several Frankenstein stories, so I left that one where it was. But I would love to rewrite that one with a feminist bent. As far as casting, my main character, Captain Jetta Calrith, she's I think late 20s. And I think you could cast a lot of different people in that role. Off the top of my head, I think maybe Erin Kellyman, who plays Carly Morgenthau in Winter Soldier. She's got that kind of like fire that Calrith has that I think it would be a good match.
that's interesting. That's very interesting.
She was great. I loved her in that.
Yeah.
For my second choice, I briefly flirted with the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh.
Oh, wow, that would have been great.
Although I had a failure of nerve there. Technically, the original novels are in public domain now, but of course, the movie is Disney, and I was not sure I wanted to incur the wrath of the house.
and is it trademark?
Just, life is too short, you can maybe try to walk the delicate, make sure not to use anything from the beloved Disney version, at least beloved to people of a certain generation. But yeah, I thought, nah, okay. Why invite fire? Okay.
I know for my second choice, I was flirting with Milton's Paradise Lost because that's one of my favorite tomes from college. I've reread that a few times, and there's some interesting things in there. And it's actually one of original work that I've been working on for the last few years flirts with a lot of that themology and mythology. So I've been kind of flirting with that anyway. So I was already starting to think along that. But fortunately, Scott and I didn't see each other's War of the Worlds H.G. Wells on there. So Gene was gracious enough to let us skirt each other on that one. So yeah.
As for myself, I didn't have any second choice. As I came up with the H.G. Wells mashup, and it was accepted, and so I didn't think about it anymore. And I'm horrible at casting. I watched this question came up on the previous nights, and so I knew it might come up tonight. But even with forewarning, I couldn't come up with anything. I know that a lot of writers make it part of their process where they choose an actor while they're working on the story. But I've just never done that. I never think about it in that solid of terms. I think part of it is that I just don't want to get stuck on a particular thing. And so it leaves it, for me, it leaves it a little bit more open for imagining a wider type of cast, perhaps. I think it would be fun to cast because the nature of the characters, if people haven't read the Invisible Man, Griffin, the Invisible Man, is a horrible guy. He's just a self-centered jerk. He gets worse and worse as he's, and so it was kind of fun writing these two characters. The time traveler is a very likable character overall. And then you've got the other character that's just really a jerk. And so it would be fun to cast that, because the actors themselves would have a lot of fun with those roles, because it is kind of a weird, kind of odd couple kind of situation.
Good point.
All right, so I'm going to throw a question out there. Since
okay, well, hold on a second. This is probably glaringly obvious, but for an older Mulan, they're almost too young for the part, but either Michelle Yeoh or Ming Na, because they're just both incredible and ageless and that. I don't know who I'd cast for the granddaughter. There's a lot of up and coming, really talented young actors right now, and
Andrea
I don't know
Bang.
who'd make the granddaughter. What was the name?
I would say Andrea Bang. That just kind of fits that from.
I don't know that name, but I can.
She's in Kim's Convenience.
Cool.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Did anyone want to toss out there just what they find the most difficult thing about writing a tie-in, and maybe that's the easiest as well? We have about 10 minutes to go.
I'll go really quick. I would say I've always had love and appreciation for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and once I started writing a Sherlock Holmes story, I realized here's a character that knows everything. He's smarter than everyone else in the room, and I have to write that now and make that entertaining and enjoyable for the reader. And the problem has to be above, or a challenge rather, to Holmes. And so it's great to watch these and read them. It's a whole nother animal to write a Sherlock Holmes story that is worthy of the character. So for me, it was getting into the headspace of not just Sherlock Holmes, but Arthur Conan Doyle when he created the character, and how he played those characters against each other.
Yeah, in one respect, it's great playing with someone else's toys, but you'd better not break them.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I found, like doing BattleTech, it's a smaller fan base, so we could fudge things here or there and not get crucified for it. But I mean, I've always wanted to write for Star Wars, just because I'm an incredibly huge Star Wars nerd, and I'm surrounded with 3 Star Trek writers now, which is just boggling my mind. But I would love to do that, because I'm so very much immersed, and I run the Star Wars role-playing game, and do all that stuff. So I wouldn't be intimidated doing that. But if I had been pitched or assigned to write like a Star Trek novel, I could never do it. I would talk myself out of it, because I don't know it very well. I don't think I could my writing would stand up to some of the luminaries who have done really good Star Wars books, and I've read them because of the Scribe Awards. I read them all the time because of the Scribe Awards, and they're really excellent. And I couldn't hold a candle to that. And so and knowing also too that you could get excruciated in the fan base if you get one thing wrong. And I've seen that happen all the time. So I tend to fall back to a little bit the more quote unquote minor ones. And actually, I've been invited. So Renegade Legion is being rebirthed, and I'm going to plug my book for a second because it just came out. So my first job as an editor, we did Voices of Varuna, which is our re-entry back into the Renegade Legion. Is actually Derek is slated to do a story for our anthology coming up. So I tend to love to world build from the start. So I really wouldn't fit really well trying to world build in established IPs. I think I would be more exploratory and new things coming out, because there are new ideas and whatnot that can be explored. So, it's just a matter of what you can handle and what you want to stretch yourself. Like doing an H.G. Wells thing for me was a stretch, because that's a writer that I've admired, that I love his work. and writing in that vein was a personal challenge of myself. And then to be honest, I was telling Gene this the other day, just the fact that I'm in this book, Turning the Tide, with all of you and all the other panelists and the writers who are in it is a bucket list item for me, because I feel like as a game designer, developer on the back, you're toiling away and doing a lot of work that a lot of people don't really see. And to be able to contribute to something, A, that's really good cause, and B, that has a lot of writers that I admire. Like I love Greg's Halo work, and some of the other books that I've read of his. Kelly, I loved your story, and I'm looking forward to the new stuff that you got coming out. And then there's just a whole bunch of people in IAMTA that I admire for so long, and to be able to include myself in this, I feel like a kid at the Thanksgiving adult table. It's kind of cool. So thanks for that. I appreciate the allowance of being at that table.
I'll actually say, Kelly, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I think Ben is articulating the fact that like being a tie-in writer never stops being awesome, like because you're always getting the chance to contribute to these IPs that we love, like we're passionate about them, and so that's the best part for me. And even though you have to do a deep dive for research on a universe, if you're planning to write in it to get all the details right, that's like fun. So it's an enjoyable process. Go ahead, Greg.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to make one that, of course, like our inner fanboys are great. I mean, the fact that there's a part of me, yay, I'm writing Planet of the Apes. That is so cool. If only I can go back in time and tell, 10-year-old Greg that someday you'll get paid for writing Planet of the Apes, or Superman, or Wonder Woman, or Frankenstein. That'd be great. However, I'm going to run counter to what Ben said, that you don't actually have to be an expert on a franchise to write tie-in novels, as long as Kelly says, you educate yourself and do your homework, which is not always a burden. Yes, you are obliged to do your homework, but honestly, these days, that's easier to do than ever before. You've got episode guides, you've got fan pages, everything is available on streaming. If you want to make yourself an expert on CSI or Leverage, you can do it in about 2 weeks. And again, I will tell the true story. An editor, Ginger Buchanan, called me about Leverage, and she asked me, Greg, are you a fan of Leverage? I considered lying to her and saying yes, because I needed the work. But honestly, what I actually told her was no, but I can be. And yeah, I then took 2 weeks. I watched all the box sets. I went up to the fan pages. I found what the fans liked. And yeah, after, and again, what are you doing today? I'm binging Leverage. What a hard job. But yeah, so you can, like I said, if someone came to you and said, Ben, write Star Trek, Lord knows there are no shortage of Star Trek encyclopedias and memory alpha and ways. You just have to be good and do the homework and learn the stuff, so you don't get the people who get excoriated, the people who don't bother to go back and binge watch the entire first season or whatever,
Yeah, and it does come back to Craig, because I know like you guys are able to, like, for me it's a time issue because I also have full-time work doing nonprofit work, so it's a matter of balancing out. So like what can my brain space handle in doing? And well, Trek actually is intimidating because now there's 3 universes that you guys are running different timelines with.
There's
it's
a
just
lot
so
of Trek.
confusing.
A lot of
Can you
Trek.
just go back to Next Generation and leave it there, please? Thank you. Okay. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, obviously it's knowing what you can handle and what you're capable of doing and being able to stretch yourself a little bit further. And as just like an exercise, as you stretch yourself further and further, the farther you can go the next time you take it up. So, at some point in time, like writing a Star Wars piece for me is like the ultimate end game for me. So that's where I'm shooting for. And it's one piece at a time. And so this story here is a step. Then, editing a new universe book is a step, and so all of these things are moving in that direction. But yeah, I totally agree, you have to want to do it. You just can't sign up and do it. It just doesn't work.
And one of the cool things, I don't want to monopolize the panel now that I'm showing up late, but is that one of the cool things about tie-in writing is it actually does force you out of your comfort zones and do different genres. Thanks to tie-in writing, I've done science fiction, horror, fantasy, police procedurals, murder mysteries, a spy thriller, even in historical romance, just which I might not have done if someone hadn't come and said, Greg, write CSI novels, oh, I'm gonna write a police procedural, cool. It keeps you fresh, because no matter how much you may love Star Trek, you can't write it 24/7 for 20 years.
Sure.
Okay, we are coming down to the wire. Ben and a couple other people mentioned the scribes, so I am going to put in the required plug here. The International Association of Media Tie-in Writers sponsors the Scribe Awards every year for the best writing in tie-in fiction. Imagine that. The nominees were announced a few weeks back. Jonathan Maberry, the president of the IAMTW, will be announcing the winners tomorrow. If anyone happens to have the link handy, if you could put it in chat in case people want to find it. He will be announcing it on Facebook Live tomorrow, 4 o'clock Pacific time. So if you want to, we'd love it. Everyone come join us there. See who won the scribes this year. And with that, we have like 4 minutes to go.
So I'll ask a real quick question. So when you, all of you guys here, when you do your writing process, are you an outline person or are you a vomit word person? I'm a vomit word person.
Outline.
Oh, that's such a long question, though. I mean, people could talk forever on that. I'm like you. I'm a total winger. I do not outline.
Outline all the way.
Yeah,
I'm with Robert.
Yeah.
I usually have an outline, not necessarily something that's really written down, but I've thought the story through enough in my head that I know where the end is. I know more or less how to get there, but you hope that there's still enough room to surprise yourself along the way.
But with tie-ins, outlines are actually practically mandatory since you have to get your plot
True.
approved by the licensor before you
True.
start writing. So
True.
even if you're to a certain degree, outlines comes with the tie-in territory, because no licensor says just go ahead and write whatever you want. We can't wait to see what you do. Okay.
Yeah, I think my question was more about process, like when you sit down.
Yeah.
So like, because I know
Outline.
obviously because I'm doing development work, you actually approve. I understand that approving the outlines, working those out. When you actually sit down to write, then the meat of it. I know some writers really do outline almost like every conversation, and this leads to that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then there are others who just wing it through. Like me, I have a problem with outlines in that sense, because my story changed 3 times while I was writing it, because I 3 different ways it was going to go until I settled.
This is the chapter I was writing tonight, all worked out, every plot beat on index cards. I'm
Nice.
so.
Yeah. I outlined the home story on a whiteboard the same day I wrote it, though. But I knew the end. So but I can't do a Sherlock Holmes on an outline. You just can't.
Okay, well, I think we're...
Thank you very much, everyone. It was so great to have you all here. Our time, we have like 60 seconds left. I'm going to send it back to Dawn.
Thank you all for taking part. I had a lot of fun. Greg, we'll talk some more later, and I've got the right email. I'd love to meet you all. Hope I'll see you guys, some of you at Emerald City or sometime in the near future. I recommend everyone buy the book. The parts I've read so far have just been a blast. I love this kind of anthology. And thank you and good night.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.